Thank you very much, and thank you, Sarah and Liam, for those presentations. Very, very interesting. So briefly, I'll just introduce myself. Jonathan Reinhardt's my name. I'm a technical consultant with Diatec, and I'm also involved with TUD in a kind of lecturing side of things as well. So I kind of wear two hats in the industry. So in that context, I've split my presentation into two kind of brief parts. I'm just going to show you some research that's kind of work in progress for me as part of my involvement with TUD, and then I'm going to show you some information practice management with inside Autodesk Construction Cloud, which is something we provide within Diatec, some of the services we provide in Diatec. So something I started to look at, I suppose, as part of some research and conference papers I'm working on as part of my TUD involvement is around the kind of small project market. And what I mean by small project market is kind of small scale housing projects, whether it's house extension, one-off homes, or any sort of even home renovation. The reason I'm focusing on this, and particularly from a BIM perspective, is because when you look at the value of that market, so if we look at the architectural market, for example, and these are all architectural market figures, by the way, if we look at the architectural market in Europe, it's worth about, I think at the moment it's about 21 billion as far as I know. I checked the other day, that has changed. The small project value, and that's for architectural fees and architectural market, is actually 56% of that, and that's a staggering number when you take into account these small projects happening all over Europe and even globally as well. It's quite a substantial part of the market. It's more than half the market effectively. In Ireland, then the market size is about 160 million, and the UK the market size is about 1.5 billion. Just to give you that context. In Europe, then, there's about 111,000 design firms. They're architectural design firms. They can be architects or architecturally related firms. And again, one staff firms make up about 65% of the market as well, just when it comes down to number of staff. Two staff firms make up about 15% of the market as well. So again, a huge portion of the market is focused on those really small projects in the industry as well. And I suppose something I've been pushing or highlighting for a few years is that we should really be, I suppose, supporting BIM in these type of organisations, in small and micro design firms, architecture, engineering firms as well. We should be looking at that, and maybe looking at it from a slightly different angle from those larger kind of complex collaborative projects. We should be looking at it in a slightly different context, and these are just similar numbers, just kind of market size for number of people in the size of firms as well. So you can see the number of people employed in these smaller and micro firms as well. And I've worked in a couple of them myself, so I definitely understand that market to a degree. And then other figures I've come across, this is from the Architects Council of European Research. They bring out a report every 2 years, and they basically survey every country in the EU effectively, in the architectural market, and they kind of understand some of the statistics in the market and understand effectively what's happening in the market. So about 31% of those organisations surveyed are 31% of them are using some sort of BIM modelling, but then 64% of them are doing 3D software. So there's probably a gap there of 33%. So there's a gap there, potentially that can be filled, whether you introduce a BIM modelling technique, that's going to fill that's going to satisfy that 3D software modelling workflows that people are using. And that kind of brings me nicely onto my next point. As that's looking at something like small BIM, for example. So the RIAI said that, in their RIAI BIM pack and some of their SME guides, is that, for a sole practitioner or SME in visiting BIM adoption, it's not practical to seek the implementation, obviously, of full ISO 19650 from the start, as obviously it can quickly lead to being overwhelmed, and that's down to time lost as well. You have to get invoices out, you have to get projects out at the end of the month, whether you're, one person company, 2-person, 5-person, whatever it is. You need to be focused on, getting that out as well. So necessarily not large ISO 19650 applies to those type of organisations, and they're typically non-collaborative projects. You're not necessarily going to get a structural engineer and the quantity surveyor in that context always working in BIM effectively. So I suppose what I'm looking into is something around a small BIM standard, and or SBIM, as I've coined the term. I still have to check if I've come up with that term or not, or someone else has, but I found it anyway. So SBIM or maybe another adaptation of ISO 19650. I'm not looking to reinvent the wheel effectively. It could be perhaps a set of guidelines that helps these small firms use ISO 19650, but for the type of projects that they're working on. We don't want to overload them. We don't want to cost them loads of time in potentially losing time out on working on projects again, getting out those invoices at the end of the month. Some of the literature I've reviewed and some of the studies I've looked at, a lot of what I see and kind of common to most people in the industry, barriers to BIM that we're seeing is it's the cost of software. Is a huge thing that I've seen, and that's in European studies. I've looked at a lot of stuff in Australia as well, and kind of in different countries like that as well. There's a lack of skills in-house, and obviously the learning curve is a loss of time for those small design firms as well, and some other factors as well. But also some benefits that I've seen come out of the literature is that smaller projects, they tend to be less collaborative or non-collaborative. So there's probably less issues with exchange of information and interoperability. And I'm not saying throw out, open BIM or interoperability. I'm not saying to push that out. But again, making something that suits these small projects and small design firms is an adaptation of potentially something called SBIM as well. So SBIM could potentially focus on gaining business efficiency rather than that collaborative effectiveness that we look at across larger, more complex projects where, effectively what we're looking to do is we're looking to streamline or make a more agile access to different information on construction projects inside a common data environment. So an SBIM standard could potentially have a different type of approach to that as well. So these are just some of the benefits for small firms as part of that as well. So let's check my time. So then just to kind of wrap that up, I suppose within Diatec then as well, something we're also looking at and something I've almost finished putting together with Diatec is we're launching kind of small project Revit LT courses effectively that these small firms can learn to use the software at their own time as well. It's self-paced video content. And it's quite an easy way for them to access training as well and to get used to potentially small BIM or even just drawing production using some of the design tools out there to kind of get them learning on that curve, and then who knows in 2, 5, 10 years what that looks like for the industry as well. And it's focused on maximising the service quality that particular company is delivering and business efficiency for smaller firms again versus that whole collaborative kind of thing as well. So I think that's kind of a key distinction there. Okay, so that's a little bit about my research. Next on to the more interesting stuff, Autodesk Construction Cloud. So I suppose in kind of to move on from that point separately, Autodesk Construction Cloud, a lot of you may be familiar, and I know Sarah and both Liam mentioned about common data environments. So Autodesk Construction Cloud, for those of you not aware, it is a common data environment. So it's a cloud-hosted location where you can put your design information for architects, engineers, mechanical designers, everything else, but as well where the contractor can work as well. Your subcontractors can all access the information from both design stage and published information ready for construction stage as well. And effectively how this works is what it allows you to do is allows you to store your information in there. But the storage of that information is actually, it's intended for construction and design information. It's not just a static area that you put information into. It's there to manage construction information. And what you can also do on that platform is you can collaborate on that information. So if that's giving feedback, on a design document, if it's giving feedback on a Revit model or a BIM model or IFC model, all of that can be done in this single source of truth or a single location, which Sarah also mentioned as well. And then you can also coordinate all your models all in this single location, do quantity takeoff, then you can track your site assets, and then you can report on those site assets as well. So if you consider this as kind of the life cycle from information production all the way through to your site stage, and you're just repeating that either for the relevant assets or moving on to your next project as well. And some of the functionality, I'm not going to go into the products in detail, but some of the functionality that enable good information practice is things like naming enforcement. So you're able to enforce an ISO 19650 type naming standard. So that means that you're putting good manners on people that are uploading documents and maybe aren't familiar with the naming conventions. Again, like Sarah mentioned as well, you require them to effectively put in the correct naming convention, and you're kind of putting some parameters in place that allows them to also name it correctly as well. So the system helps people effectively understand naming conventions as well. On top of the naming enforcement within inside the platform, so again, this is, you're looking at this as if it's inside a web browser or Google Chrome or on top of a desktop computer. There's also a mobile app available and various different iPads and Android apps as well. So effectively with the naming enforcement, what that also does is it will take a file name and will extract the metadata from that file name, and it will populate it as the metadata into your common data environment. So in this case, we're looking at it's actually an architecture file in the civils folder. Ignore that for the moment. But we have a couple of different metadata stored here, and what we're actually seeing is we're seeing that data has been extracted from that PDF name and being populated out here, whether that's status code, drawing type, level number, zone number, or anything like that as well. So just there's some functionality in the platform that lends itself quite well to kind of good information practice, and then just setting up your folder structure initially as well. You can set up a folder structure that potentially reflects what you're doing on your own server, what a client has asked for, or depending how closely you're working with to ISO 19650, hopefully closely enough, you can design your own folder structure to suit that. And that folder structure is also how people access information. So the WIP folders, for example, being only accessible by each WIP team. So the architects can only access their own WIP folder, civils team can only access their own civils folder, and so on and so forth, again in the context of ISO 19650. So the platform itself lends itself quite well to do that. And I suppose based on that folder structure, then you're looking to manage that collaborative access across the entire project. And there's a couple of different ways you can do it. So you can control access at the folder level. You can add different users. So you may have 10, 50, 100, 200, 300 people working on a project. And do you decide to add every single person to the folder? Probably not, because you're going to be managing those people. There's going to be a turnover of staff. There's going to be new people arriving at the company and so on. So an easy way that the platform enables that to actually manage it is by using something like roles. So if you have 10 architects on a project, I just need to add the role to the folder. Therefore, if a new architect joins, architect number 11 or architect number 20, they'll automatically be added to the folder as well. So again, from a good information practice, as long as you have this type of system set up with roles or companies enabled for access, then it kind of streamlines that for you, and it means you're not, whether you're information manager, BIM manager, document controller, it's just making your job a little bit easier as well in that context, because it's kind of automating that for you, or just putting manners in that as well. So again, choosing to have a role access to the shared folder, you can choose to have everyone to the shared folder and then just restrict by role at the kind of work in progress level as well. So using roles in companies, and just if you to access Autodesk Docs, by the way, if you have an AEC collection, you have access to it. A lot of people don't realise that as well, so it may be something to check if you want access to Autodesk Docs. The role that I mentioned then is associated with a username. You'll notice these are all my own email addresses with a couple of dummy names there. These roles are then assigned in the member section. So this role of a fire safety engineer, BIM manager, architect, structural engineer, that's the role that's then applied that I looked at on the previous role as well, or the previous slide, architect, BIM manager. So if there's 10 BIM managers or 10 architects, it will inherit that particular role as well. So the system allows that to be managed in quite an easy kind of way as well. And you can also do it by company as well. If you define a user's company, you can assign that company to just have specific access to their folder as well. So it's quite straightforward. And then I suppose looking at, that's kind of looking at the setup of your folder structure, common data environment, how access is controlled. But once you start, producing information from an architectural and design perspective, there are other functionality in the tool as well, things like design collaboration that intelligently knows the difference between your WIP area and your shared area. So again, that's automatically understood in the platform as well. You don't necessarily have to manage that as strictly as you may on an internal server or a separate kind of system as well. It knows where different teams' information belongs, and the way it actually manages that is, you've got your own WIP area. Each team has their own WIP area. You've project shared area. area, and the information is moving internally, iteratively within each design team, and then you're choosing when you share a package, and other teams can choose when they consume that effectively as well. In very simple terms, architectural team working away at the top, our engineering team at the bottom, and a shared area in the middle. And an architectural team, they're going to have lots of internal iterations, as are the engineering team, before they're ready to share information. So the system allows us to actually manage this as well, using the design collaboration tool as well. I can choose when I share something, when I want to populate it into the shared area as well. So again, in the context of ISO 19650. And then other functionality that it gives you on top of that design collaboration management is it gives you something called a swim lane view. So this swim lane tells me when every team effectively shared a piece of information, if I consumed that piece of information, or consumed being another way to accept information effectively as well, and it will show me across the entire project timeline. Different icons have different meanings, and you know exactly what you're looking at when you look at it. If you have a blank circle, for example, you know that information has been shared, but you haven't consumed it. And this is all, again, in that web browser environment. And this is all linked back to that folder structure in that common data environment inside Autodesk Docs as well. It's all completely connected, what I'm effectively showing here. Different symbols mean different things as well, have different meanings. If it's a filled circle, it means it's been shared and that you've consumed it as well. So again, you're in control of when you consume a piece of information as well. And then just to wrap it up, I suppose connected data then makes for better data. I think we'll all agree that as well. Connected data makes for better data, and then in the platform as well, when we get to site stage, after all that design collaboration, we can go, okay, well, there's a Revit model in our published folder. We want to turn that Revit model into something called an asset list. That asset list can be a list of doors, radiators, AHUs, pipe, cable tray, and then we can actually track those assets on site. So these were actually extracted from the Revit model. And again, this is inside my common data environment, inside the same area. You can see all of my doors, pumps, windows, whatever else I have there. I can then apply barcodes onto those objects as well. I can even extract those Revit parameters associated with the asset. Then when someone scans a barcode on site, it will bring up the fire rating, whether it's a pressure test or anything, whether it's piping as well. So I can extract that. And again, this is all happening in that web browser. And again, that radiator or whatever unit it could be is also linked back to the Revit file. So when I click on that Revit file, it will bring me to that specific asset, which has the unique Revit ID. You can see it under there as well. That's all a model-based extraction of those assets. And then again, in the system, what I can do at that site stage, I can link in my checklists, my forms, RFIs, cost variations, quality issues. And effectively, this door has photographs, it has checklists associated with it, schedule activities, different types of sheets, submittals, RFIs as well. And that's all contained within that asset as well. So connecting your data in whatever platform you're working is certainly a way that you'll get a bigger benefit out of it. So thank you very much.